By April 1945, the European sky had disappeared behind a thick canopy of black smoke. The distinction between day and night was gone, replaced by the relentless, glowing silhouettes of burning cities. On the ground, the industrial infrastructure of the continent had been severed. Railway networks were twisted into scrap, and the factories that once fueled a global war were reduced to jagged piles of rubble. Millions of displaced civilians walked through these ruins, carrying whatever they could salvage as they fled toward an uncertain future. The military collapse of the Third Reich was absolute. Yet, amidst this highly documented destruction, a central question remains. What actually happened to the man responsible for it all? To understand how an absolute ruler ended up trapped beneath a burning capital, we must first recognize the scale of the empire he had to lose. Just 4 years earlier, the map of Europe looked entirely different. Starting in 1939, the German military swept outward with terrifying speed, overwhelming borders across Poland, Scandinavia, and the Low Countries. This blitzkrieg strategy left international observers stunned. Military experts and newspapers at the time regularly published the same conclusion. Hitler's war machine appeared unstoppable. When major Western powers fell in rapid succession, culminating in the occupation of Paris, the myth of ultimate Nazi supremacy seemed cemented. This lightning-speed expansion forced the German military to manage a territory larger than it could sustainably occupy. Supply lines were now stretched thousands of miles from the industrial heartland, creating structural vulnerabilities that the Allied powers were preparing to exploit. By late 1942, the momentum broke. In the bitter cold of Russia, the formidable German Sixth Army was entirely decimated at Stalingrad. This defeat did more than deplete the army's numbers. It shattered the myth of German invincibility, dealing a permanent blow to the morale of the soldiers on the front lines. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces opened a second front at Normandy. This forced a thinning German army to defend thousands of miles of coastline against an industrial power they could no longer match. From the east, the Soviet Red Army began a relentless push toward Germany's borders, executing a massive strategic encirclement. Simultaneously, American and British forces advanced from the west. The German-occupied territory was rapidly compressed into a narrow, shrinking corridor. Soon, the regime's natural geographic defenses were breached, as Allied troops and heavy machinery poured across the Rhine River and deep into the German homeland. The German High Command faced a war of survival on two fronts, trapped within a geographic vice that was closing from both directions. Looking at military maps in early 1945, you might assume Hitler still commanded a functional force capable of mounting a fierce defense. The reality was far different. Many of the remaining armies were paper divisions, units that existed in official reports but lacked the soldiers, ammunition, and transport needed to fight. Continuous Allied bombing campaigns had targeted industrial fuel production. Without oil, the German armored divisions were physically frozen in place, unable to maneuver or retreat. This fuel starvation also permanently grounded the Luftwaffe. The once feared German Air Force was reduced to wreckage in snowy fields. Massive graveyards of scrapped military hardware piled up across the country, as sophisticated machinery became useless without the logistics to support it. While the Nazi High Command continued to issue aggressive orders from headquarters, the physical empire had been hollowed out. They were commanding a ghost army. By April, the entire geographic trap had narrowed to a single point: Berlin. The capital city was now completely encircled. Inside the city, electricity was gone and water mains were severed. The residents lived to the constant, deafening roar of incoming Soviet artillery. Thousands of families lived in the rubble of their own streets, caught in the final collapse of a regime that could no longer provide basic survival. The Reichstag building stood as a battered, cratered symbol of this decay. The physical centers of state power were being systematically dismantled by enemy fire. In these final weeks, Nazi leadership proposed a plan to flee to the Bavarian Alps to coordinate a prolonged mountain resistance. Hitler rejected the retreat. He remained in the capital, caught between a refusal to admit the war was over and a belief that his presence in Berlin was the only thing preventing a total surrender of civilian morale. By staying in the capital, Hitler transformed a military defeat into a claustrophobic, inescapable trap. He issued a final decree to his remaining generals: "I will not leave Berlin." The perimeter of an empire that once spanned the continent had contracted to a few reinforced concrete rooms, buried beneath the Chancellery Garden. While the city above was reduced to ash, the regime's final hours were sealed behind these steel doors. Time was running out. The massive military campaigns that once redefined the map of Europe had reached their limit. The final chapter of the conflict would not be decided on a battlefield, but within the silence of this bunker, as the focus narrowed to the specific actions Hitler took in his final hours.